I just want to place on the record the revulsion we feel on this side of the House that Frank Hester, a Conservative Party donor who has given more than £10 million to the Tory party in the last year, said of the Right Honourable Member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, and that she makes you, and I quote, want to hate all black women, and the MP, and I quote, should be shot. This is utterly revolting, racist and insightful language. It has no place in our politics and public life. And given the vast sums he's given not just to the Conservative Party but the Prime Minister, if they have any integrity whatsoever, they will give every single penny piece back and apologise to the Right Honourable Member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington for these appalling comments. And I'm sure at some point in the debate this afternoon the Treasury bench will want to confirm both of those things. Turning to the budget, the government has summed up what is now obvious to everyone in Britain. 14 years of Conservative incompetence have broken Britain's economy. And it's all there in black and white. The economy back in recession, the highest tax burden in 70 years, a record tax-raising parliament, wages lower today than they were in 2010, households worse off than they were at the last election, a fall in living standards over an entire parliament for the first time in history. And from next month, a real terms cut per person in NHS funding at the point when the NHS is going through the worst crisis in its history. They should be outraged at the misuse of public money. They should be as appalled as we are that in the midst of a national crisis, when so many people rushed to danger or played their part in the national response, those businesses that shifted from their normal activity to trying to help and genuinely doing the right thing for the right reasons, but at the same time they were doing all of those things, there were others who sought to use the pandemic to make a quick buck at our expense. I think it's disgusting. And the fact that so many billions of pounds of PPE was wasted, much of it literally going up in smoke, should be something that exercises all of us. And the voters can make their own judgment about why it is that the Conservative Party is still so relaxed about that profligacy, waste and fraud, about the importance of and the impact that financial events could make. Because there was this narrative spun after the 2010 general election about the global financial crisis. And they love to say that this was all the fault of the last Labour government. But I've got bad news for them. The former Chancellor of the Exchequer, well, I'd better name him because there have been so many, George Osborne said recently in his excellent podcast, and I quote, this is of the late, great Alistair Darling, George Osborne said, and I quote, "In the financial crisis, he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer who earned a lot of trust with the way he handled that crisis," end quotes. Of course, it was politically expedient for the Conservative Party at the time to pretend that the reason the economy was going through so many challenges was because a Labour government had bailed out the banks. But of course, when you're presented with a crisis, you do the right thing. We did the right thing then, and we would do the right thing in the future when presented with crises, as we expected this government to do the right thing in a crisis. In fact, we engaged with the government in good faith throughout that crisis. We never imagined for a moment that people would be using VIP lanes to rip off the British taxpayer. And that's why the Shadow Chancellor, if she is the next Chancellor of the Exchequer, will go after those people to get their money back. And we don't doubt her determination to do so. It was meant to bring millions of voters who have abandoned the Conservative Party back into the tent. Instead, it has driven the former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party out of the tent altogether. Because after 14 years of Conservative government, it's Conservative MPs who are also leaving because, and I quote the member for Ashfield, "You can't get a police officer to turn up to your house when it gets burgled. People are pulling their own teeth out. They can't get a GP appointment." What a damning indictment of the Conservative Party from a man that this Prime Minister chose to elevate to one of the highest offices in that party. Of course, the clause came out as soon as the defection today was announced, but they aren't being aimed at the member for Ashfield. No, they're begging him to come back. Conservative MPs have told Channel 4 News, and I quote, "The fact Rishi promoted him to Deputy Chairman tells you all you need to know about his judgment," end quotes. Even Conservative MPs admit it in private. the Prime Minister is too weak to run his own party, let alone the country. Or, as Lord Lloyd Webber might have written if he was scripting a new musical for the Conservative Party, they are past the point of no return. And apparently looking to Boris Johnson now, saying, wishing you were somehow here again. But of course, I do have to give credit where credit is due. This is a budget so bad that it has done what was previously unthinkable. It's united the warring factions of the Conservative Party. They are united in agreement that it was a disaster. Because before the Chancellor stood up, the leader of what's left of the Scottish Conservatives had already announced his opposition to it, soon followed by the Energy Minister, a minister of this government, exclaiming his deep disappointment at his government's own energy tax. Then we had the Security Minister and Foreign Minister write a joint article opposing the Chancellor's lack of investment in defence. So the Energy Minister doesn't support the energy policy, the Foreign and Security Ministers don't support the defence policy, and even the Chancellor says he doesn't support the tax rises he's imposing on working people. So it begs the question, is there anyone left who actually believes in what this government is doing? And people feel free to give way and leap to the government's defence, but I think they sadly agree. The Chancellor named several members in his speech, presumably on the basis that misery loves company. Madam Deputy Speaker, and I've got to confess, I don't even know who the new Conservatives are. There are so many warring tribes now. It's so many. The families evolve every week. I mean, it's a level of reproduction that even the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson failed to match. Indeed, the simple truth is this: however much the party opposite tries to build this idea that politics can't change anything, there's no point in voting, that we're all the same, there won't be change with a change of government after the next general election, politics does make a difference. Voting can change things, and I cite in evidence the fact that when we left office, we had the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in the history of the NHS. I cite in evidence that if we'd had economic growth under this government, at just the rate we had under the last Labour government, there would be £40 billion a year extra to invest in our public services without having to raise taxes on anyone. That's Labour's record. It's a record we're proud to defend. They can't defend their record. They have no record. This is the cost of what they are calling in the country Rishi's recession. And what about their record on non-doms? We know Conservative MPs don't support abolishing the non-dom tax status because they've been telling us for the past decade. The howls of protest from the benches opposite were deafening from the moment Labour first proposed what is a very simple policy and principle, that people who live and work in Britain should pay their taxes here too. The member for Northampton North said it would be anti-aspirational. If only he had as much aspiration for our NHS and school children as he does for people avoiding their taxes. When the Conservatives are touring the broadcast studios to criticise Labour's plans, never forget that the Chancellor said abolishing the non-dom tax status would not benefit the taxpayer. The Levelling Up Secretary said it would lead to talent flight. The Health Secretary said it would put at risk 230,000 nurses and Britain's place in jeopardy as the filming location for the Barbie movie. And the Health Minister, the member for Lewis, described it as about as much use as an ashtray on a motorbike. And now each and every one of them is preparing to vote for Labour's plan. The bright glow coming from the red-faced members opposite is blinding. But never forget, they criticised our policy, they criticised our costings, they've adopted our policy, they've adopted our costings, they don't have any credibility left. And that they have finally relented is further evidence that Labour is winning the battle of ideas again today. Never again can the Conservatives claim with a straight face that Labour doesn't have a plan. They wouldn't have the first idea what to do if they didn't have our plans to pinch. In fact, it seems to me that today the Labour Party has replaced the IEA as the Conservatives' most influential and favoured think tank. Look at the impact we're having on government policy. Labour's NHS workforce plan nicked. Labour's plan to recruit dentists to the most underserved areas nicked. Labour's plan for a progressive ban on tobacco nicked. Labour's plan for a windfall tax on oil and gas giants nicked. And now Labour's plan to abolish the non-dom tax status nicked. If the Conservatives are so desperate to see Labour's manifesto implemented, they should just call a general election.